The White Sox have been so bad this season that fans are now not happy when they win. Let's discuss if it's worth being disappointed that the record-setting 121st loss did not happen at home. Next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. Also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the White Sox somehow swept the Los Angeles Angels at home. Folks at the ballpark were not happy. The Sox did not pick up their 121st loss and break the 1962 New York Mets record at home. There may have been acceptable reasons to boo the team, but I want to discuss why I disagree with the booing overall. Then ESPN's Jesse Rogers and Buster Olney recently ran a report of more franchise dysfunction that actually resulted in this historic losing, and I want to discuss that in the second segment. And then I discuss with Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds on both teams' eventual pursuit of Skip Schumaker to be the next manager. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. All right, fan how you want, but I, for one, enjoy it when the White Sox win. And everydayers would know I talked about it on, I think, an episode about 2 weeks ago. You know, it's a nice break from all this historic losing. And yes, I do want to see the White Sox still win. I'm one of those crazy ones. And yesterday's 7-run fifth inning was just fun to watch. And while I've been hammering Chris Flexen still being on this team, he deserves his flowers with an amazing 6 1/3 inning start of shutout ball. He deserved that standing ovation. However, in this case, I do sympathize with those who paid to come out to this series finale series, basically, and watch losing. And they did not come away with that. They didn't get their money's worth. So I can sympathize with that, especially since you may have given money to Jerry Reinsdorf, obviously. However, I would have hoped that those who booed, you only booed because you wanted to be like, where has this baseball been all season? Where's this been, this type of baseball being played? Where's that been? We've rarely seen it. Why couldn't you do this, say, in July when you only won 3 games, or April when you only won 3 games? Where was this? And I can see being frustrated because the White Sox look like a competent professional baseball team for 3 days. All 9 hitters looked like pros at the plate and in the field. The Angels actually looked like the White Sox. They were White Soxing all over the field. The pitching was great outside of Justin Anderson blowing a lead on Wednesday. And I can even see finding some frustration in yesterday's huge 7-run fifth, as that was the most runs scored all inning. That was the most runs scored in an inning all season. The most runs ever. It took until game 159 for the Sox to finally score 7 runs in an inning, to finally explode on a team. Game 159. So if you booed, I hope it came from letting out the frustration of, this is when you decided to be good. And maybe you booed because deep in your heart of hearts, you know that this series will be cited when Grady Sizemore, the ultimate backup plan for the manager, has the interim manager title tag lifted. You knew in your heart, man, this just gave them more inspiration to go with Grady. And again, he is plan B. You do not want to be hiring plan B at such a momentous occasion. But if you booed simply because the Sox did not pick up defeat 121, 122, or 123, well, buyer beware. I'm sorry. Hate to not be sympathetic there, but there was the chance that the Sox could randomly run into another bad team playing terrible baseball, that they could win at least a game. It was still a possibility. I know winning this year has been very, very rare, but there was still even a 5% chance for the White Sox to win. So you got, when you bought that ticket, buyer beware. Or when you turned on the TV, viewer beware. And I'm also going to disagree with the booers, and I'm going to die on this hill, and I know I'm going to take the slings and arrows here, but I got 4 reasons why I'm all right that the Sox did not pick up loss number 121 at home. The first reason, the Sox contextually will always go down as the worst team ever. Even if they end up somehow sweeping the Tigers and just tying the Mets record, they are going to be the all-time worst than the Mets. Yes, if you want to go literally, of course, the 1899 Spiders were the worst team ever. But as I talked with Brett Ballantini yesterday, and as everydayers would know on a couple other episodes, the Spiders contextually were terrible because the owner owned two teams and he put all his best players on another team. And I get it that the Sox sweeping the Angels now means that they will not beat the Philadelphia A's record for the worst losing percentage ever in the modern era. But up until August, did you even know how bad the 1916 Philadelphia A's were? I didn't. Heck, I forgot that the A's were even in Philadelphia for a while. They're now on to their fourth city. But you knew how bad the 1962 New York Mets were because of all those losses they racked up. And here's the thing. They were bad because they were an expansion team. The Sox were not starting from scratch. The Sox have been in business for 124 years and counting. And the Philadelphia A's were bad because of cheapness, but they had the context of, you needed attendance to afford players, and they struggled to draw. Now, Jerry makes you think you have to come to the park so he can pay for players when he still has a TV contract and wealth beyond anything Connie Mack could ever imagine to afford a better team. And plus, as everydayers would know by now, the Sox have access to technology to operate just like every other team does, and they refuse to do it. Hey, Connie Mack may have been a cheap son of a gun, but don't think for a second he would be illogical to refuse to use any avenue to gain an advantage on his opponents. All right, second, picking up loss number 121 with Jerry sitting in his owner's box is probably not going to suddenly make him realize the error of his ways and suddenly either sell the team or open up his pocketbook and spend to bring in Juan Soto and other premium talent. It's just not going to happen. He has shown he has a very high capacity for embarrassment. And he has proven he loves baseball, even if he can't accept it's no longer 1992 or 1958. He isn't selling and he isn't spending. Well, he never spent enough. He does deserve a tiny bit of credit for at least allowing the payroll to get over 150 million when they were in that small contention window. But this is a man that has a high capacity. This is just what I've drawn from reading all the reports and talking to a few people that know him. This is a man that has a high capacity to rationalize his behavior. And as I'll discuss in the next segment, ESPN's Jesse Rogers reported he still thinks, Reinsdorf still thinks rehiring Tony La Russa was a good idea because the Sox actually won the 2021 AL Central. The man can rationalize. So while I applaud the sell the team chance, and those should keep coming until it either happens or there's actually good baseball being played again, it's not going to force the owner to change his ways. However, I will say this too. Sell the team should be the new booing for Sox fans. We should not boo. We shouldn't. We should be chanting, sell the team, sell the team. And I loved how that was coming down on Tuesday and Wednesday. I think it's a very appropriate way to vent. Maybe plea. Because even though Jerry isn't going to sell, you and I have to wait for him to die. And that is a sad state to be in. I shouldn't have to be hoping a human being dies for things to get better. But that's what's going to happen. But I recommend next year, because it's going to be bad next season, no one boos. You just chant, sell the team on every bad play, on every defeat. Just keep chanting, sell the team. While it may not happen, at least it tells that owner, I'm not happy with how you're running things. You are not qualified to run things. You're not qualified to be an owner, even though you have the wealth. That doesn't make you good. And I think this is an appropriate response because the players being bad is not entirely on the players, which is reason number 3. The players are out there working. Again, the clubhouse isn't so toxic. We're not getting reports this year that it's like what it was, last year. And I'll discuss, Jesse Rogers' report in the next segment about, teammates refused to show up to Liam Hendriks' press conference after he beat cancer. That's how bad the team was in 2022 and 2023 in terms of the clubhouse. You don't have a Yasmani Grandal dragging everyone down and even dragging the lineup down. And you could say, well, the dysfunctional team in 2022 won 81 games. Yeah, but it also lost 101. And that 101 losses, guys, is the reason why the Sox are not going to be picking in the top 9 next year. Just remember that, because that would be the only silver lining for this entire losing is having the chance to win the lottery, land the top pick, Ethan Holiday. Instead, this year's team has just been a collection of has-beens, what could be, and a superstar player, looking like the losing has just completely broken them. The only very small silver lining to this historic losing is it may have finally convinced the owner to allow his handpicked GM to make necessary front office changes to become a modern functional franchise. And even then, that comes with all the risks that I'll discuss in the next second and how this guy even got the job. Because you got to think that Chris Getz actually has to meet the moment, and he has not met a moment. And plus none of that, all these changes is going to take years for it to bear fruit. And I'll give you a pass, though, if you're going to boo Luis Robert Jr. and his struggles or Andrew Vaughn and Andrew Benintendi, because the front office actually believes all it needs is LRJ to return to all-star form. And, the two Andrews playing above replacement level when they barely do that for things to get better. So you can boo those three. And again, I shouldn't be telling you how to fan, but I'm not ever going to criticize somebody for booing those three players. But the final reason I disagree with the booing is let's play the long game and realize at some point this weekend, exiled, beloved former TV voice Jason Benetti gets to call the Sox losing game 121. And yes, he was exiled out of the franchise. He was allowed to leave because the owner didn't like his humor and was disgusted by him eating on the camera. He ran off a good broadcaster because Jerry did not like how he became a national voice. While teams embrace that, heck, teams build that up, especially during the dark days. But not Jerry. He's so selfish that he wants a television broadcast meant for him. Not for you and I, but for him. Just like this team, just like this franchise. It's supposed to be for Jerry. That's the other frustrating thing about Jerry. He doesn't realize he owns a public trust. And he's never realized that. But it's the big picture stuff with those little details that has made this franchise such a joke. And Jason was allowed to leave, and he gets to call on the Detroit side, the Sox losing game 121. And that is so fitting in a season that has shown once people escape the South side, except Eloy Jimenez, but once they escape, things get better. And loss 121 will come from the Tigers, who are being led by A.J. Hinch, the manager everyone wanted to be in charge in 2021 before the owner hijacked the manager hiring process. He hijacked it. So again, think of the long game. And even though Grady's going to run out Garrett Crochet tonight, the Sox are going to be beaten by the Red Hot Tigers this weekend and clinch a playoff berth. Something that the Sox could still be doing if Hinch was the skipper and the owner spent the necessary money. Well, the only silver lining in this historic losing season is people are feeling more comfortable to discuss how big of a mess the Sox franchise is under Jerry Reinsdorf. So let's discuss ESPN's latest report of dysfunction next on Locked On White Sox. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And the White Sox wrap up the season with a 3-game set against the Detroit Tigers. The first pitch of Game 1 is at 5:40 p.m. Central Standard Time tonight. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. Is Locked On White Sox is available at places such as Apple and Spotify. Again, I would love to think I'm a great audio companion for you. If you're mowing the lawn or you're stuck in traffic or, you just want to just close your eyes and picture a better White Sox future, you can also listen to me via audio. All right, so The Athletic, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times have all run extensive pieces into how the Sox have become the worst team ever. And a lot of the findings have pointed to the team's leadership being a dumpster fire, and owner Jerry Reinsdorf is to blame for lighting the match. The Athletic, WSJ, and the New York Times all paint a picture of how the Sox got to this point of awfulness. But ESPN's Jesse Rogers and Buster Olney reports how this dysfunction actually led to this historic losing this season. So that's the one thing I love about what they wrote about. You're going to hear tales of how Pedro Grifol was in over his head, and especially is making excuses. You'll hear how Jerry Reinsdorf can rationalize anything, along with Chris Getz being in over his head and how he got the job in the first place. And secret, just a hint, it's the shadow GM Tony La Russa season. There were missteps from every level of organization and just plain bad baseball that turned the 2024 White Sox from a bad team into a historically awful one. Quote, "There's so much randomness in our sport, and the worst teams still usually win a share of games," said one rival executive. But the White Sox have taken the randomness out of the sport. They are that bad, end quote. All right, think about that. The Sox made so many missteps in the roster construction that they took out the randomness of baseball. I mean, think about how one of the reasons why teams win the World Series. It's because of the variances. It's because of the randomness. It's because if you have one bad week, you're out. It's just like that during the regular season. You have 3 games where you're just not hitting, or you have a game where your pitcher just doesn't have his best stuff. You got a chance of losing. The White Sox completely took that out of the equation, at least in August and July. Like, there was a 2-month period where, again, the Sox won 7 games in a 2-month period. That should not happen in baseball. As I said, fair share. Maybe winning 15 or 20, but the Sox were so bad they took that out. And this piece just paints how bad the clubhouse was in 2023 that I highlighted in the previous segment. But it also shows just how manager Pedro Grifol was incapable of handling it. Here's what it reads. Grifol had a complicated clubhouse on his hands. He didn't really do complicated. Some managers are practice schmoozers, excellent politicians. Grifol is not, according to some peers. He is a hardcore baseball guy, strong in his beliefs, and expects players to be accountable. His preference, friends believe, would have been to focus on the day-to-day work, but instead he felt compelled to tend to a fractured clubhouse. At least one White Sox staffer said this took up a lot of Grifol's energy. Quote, "When you get a first-time manager like that and veteran players that will take advantage of him, they didn't help him," end quote. Well, wasn't Pedro supposed to be the guy who solved all the problems that happened in 2022? I remember that being said, that all the Sox needed to do was hire a new manager and players returning to form, and things were going to be better in 2023. But Pedro apparently couldn't deal with it. He wasn't the right guy. Maybe they should have asked that in the interview. Hey, how do you handle conflict? Instead, they just listened. Rick Hahn listened to all the things that he could mention that was wrong about the Sox and was like, "Yep, you're speaking my language, buddy." But here's the quote that shows Pedro didn't think he was part of the problem. Quote, "I miss having healthy players," Grifol told ESPN this week. "It's not an excuse. That's just the reality. I missed having Liam Hendricks and other really good players able to perform. It wasn't the players' fault. They just got hurt," end quote. So first of all, was it the toxic clubhouse? Or was it guys getting hurt, Pedro? How about you just say you were in over your head and you couldn't address both properly? Yes, injuries happen. But think about it. The Tigers are about to make the playoffs, and can you name more than 5 Tigers players? In fact, they've had probably the most starting pitchers, I believe, is the stat, especially in the second half, and they've dealt with their fair share of injuries, but they're on their way to the playoffs. You know why? Because they got a manager who's capable of handling it. And this piece shows the Tigers playing the long game. They're in the position to make the playoffs this year, while the Sox are going to lose possibly up to 123 games. And it all comes down to when owner Jerry Reinsdorf hijacked the hiring process in 2021. This is what Rogers and Olney wrote. Hahn viewed Hinch as an ideal candidate. He had championship pedigree, an excellent reputation for communication, and an advanced understanding in analytics honed during his time with the progressive Astros. For Hahn, Hinch would be the guy who was going to drive the White Sox forward and help the front office define for Reinsdorf where and how the organization was behind. Reinsdorf, however, wasn't interested. He felt he had fired La Russa wrongly in 1986 and bore a debt to an old friend. Above all else, Reinsdorf, who declined to speak to ESPN for the story, is consistently steadfast to friends and employees. In his time as owner of the White Sox and the Chicago Bulls, he has had a lifetime of battles with owners and others, but he trusts his people. Quote, "Fact is, he might be too trusting," said one staffer, end quote. La Russa was hired without Hinch even going through the formal interview with the White Sox. right there. Good communication, analytically thinking. That is how a manager could handle a hurt team and a toxic clubhouse. And instead, they hired Pedro Grifol, and then he makes excuses. But here is the quote that hits Jerry's ability to rationalize any bad decision, or the piece here. But La Russa was in his fourth decade as manager, bearing a stature that helped sustain a general stability. And in La Russa's first year in 2021, the White Sox won the AL Central with a 93-69 record. Quote, to this day, Reinsdorf will tell people hiring La Russa was the right move, especially after seeing how the team did after he left, end quote, said one source. That's his ability to rationalize. He can't see that Tony La Russa helped torpedo the franchise because he had one good season and one good half a season. Because if he would have looked at, if he could actually look in the mirror and do a self-analysis, you saw the Sox struggled in the second half of the season. They didn't win as much as they did in the first half. And then they got crushed by the Astros. And then here's where we still have the shadow GM involved. Jerry can, because obviously he conducted the worst GM search of all time last year, but this piece gives clues as to why it points back to Tony La Russa, and then why, too, this franchise is so dysfunctional. Sources said that as Reinsdorf prepared to fire Hahn in August 2023, La Russa gave positive feedback about Getz, someone he had gotten to know as the assistant GM of the White Sox, where he had worked since 2017. A typical industry practice is to ask permission to speak to a range of candidates from other organizations, in some case division rivals, in an effort to glean a greater understanding of their information systems. Sometimes subterfuge is the only real reason for the interviews, but Reinsdorf wasn't interested in that kind of learning. He was presented with the option of interviewing candidates outside the organization and declined. Getz was his guy, and nobody was going to change his mind. Getz was hired 9 days after Williams and Hahn were dismissed. Reinsdorf was not only not interested in free information, but basically Tony made the hire. And you could say, well, you're making an assumption. Come on, fam. Tony can say he's not in charge, but clearly he has the ear and the respect of the owner, the guy that makes the final decisions. And it highlights how Getz, then how this disaster kept going by recommending Getz, who wasn't ready for this job. He was more focused on the draft when the team was spiraling out of control in June and July. He missed the boat on trading Garrett Crochet, especially he was completely caught off guard by Crochet's extension demands from other teams trying to trade for him. And then still teams that were pursuing him kind of was like, we'll give you a fair offer. They just didn't give him the players that he wanted. And then to show you the complete dysfunction, there was actually a meeting that took place on July 31st with Reinsdorf, Getz, Grifol, and La Russa, because Getz wanted to can Grifol right after the trade deadline. And Tony La Russa was in the room. And nothing happened for another week. And the Sox lost 21 straight games. But here's the biggest thing. Tony La Russa was in the room. He shouldn't be in the room. He claims he's not in charge, but he was in the room. And to me, the biggest takeaway from this piece is there's actually two guys to blame for this mess of a franchise, Jerry Reinsdorf and Tony La Russa. His coming back to the franchise outside of 2021 has had nothing but a terrible impact on this team, on this organization. And again, he may claim to not be in charge, but his voice carries weight with the owner. And it was the owner who brought him back. And again, why is Tony La Russa being a bad thing? Because I hate the apologists that say, well, he's a Hall of Famer. Okay, the game passed him by. He even admitted he didn't even know the rules at one point. He didn't know the Manfred rule. Things change. Okay? If you could bring Connie Mack back today, do you think he'd be able to manage based on 1916 standards? No, he would not have success. Tony La Russa was managing based on 2006 and 2011, and the game had changed within 10 years like that. And he couldn't embrace it, and he couldn't change, and neither could Reinsdorf. And their inability to change has just absolutely torpedoed this franchise. And again, I'll give you another example of, Tony's a Hall of Famer. You should listen to a Hall of Famer. Dusty Baker took him to school in the 2021 ALDS. Because you know why? Dusty Baker could change and adapt. And if you can't change with the times, you'll get this mess. Instead of, say, the Rangers of 2023, when Bruce Bochy, he changed with the times. You see, another Hall of Fame manager. Terry Francona kept evolving. Tony La Russa did not evolve. He didn't realize, oh, teams like to hit home runs now because it's a great way to score runs. He kept trying to play the game like it was in 2006 and 2011. And guess what? It didn't turn into a World Series. It turned into a dumpster fire. Well, the only benefit of still having Tony La Russa around is maybe it can help the White Sox hire Skip Schumaker as the next manager. However, the Reds are eyeing him too. So I spoke with Locked On Reds host Jeff Carr about both teams eventually pursuing him to be their team's next manager. And we'll discuss that, and I'll share that with you next on Locked On White Sox. This episode of Locked On White Sox is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah, with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. And hey, the White Sox and Brewers used to be rivals. Not anymore since the Brewers went to the National League. But the Brewers will be playing playoff baseball, and that's just a short drive up I-94 North. So you could book a stay with Booking.com, get a ticket to the game, eat abroad at a tailgate, maybe go to Sobelman's, get a burger and a Bloody Mary after. Just saying. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home teams or rival stadium. No matter what team you are rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. city from U.S. cities. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. And PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win this Sunday. Last week for a free W. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends, and PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And I always tell you about my buddy on the text chain who lives behind above the cheddar curtain. Some Sundays, instead of having to drive a half hour over the border to get his selections in, he can roll out of bed and use PrizePicks. I love PrizePicks for how simple it is to play. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And the White Sox wrap up the season with a 3-game set against the Detroit Tigers. The first pitch of Game 1 is at 5:40 p.m. Central Standard Time tonight. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. Welcome back in to Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all my everydayers for sticking with me this long. Hope you guys have a fun weekend planned. I don't really know I'm taking my daughter to a daddy-daughter dance tomorrow. Looking forward to that. Should be fun. All right, so until Bob Nightingale confirms that the Sox top target is the Dodgers first base coach, I'm still going to stick with his reporting that Skip Schumaker is the team's top candidate for the job. Skip will be in demand, and there is rumors that the Cincinnati Reds really, really want to hire him. So Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds and I sat down to discuss both teams' pursuit of last year's NL Manager of the Year.
Well, Skip Schumaker seems to be the most attractive option out there on the MLB manager free agent market, or at least he's one of the most attractive options out there. And with there being a short list right now of teams that are looking for managers, the Reds and the White Sox chief among them, and I think the Mariners are too. We'll see exactly how all that goes down. I wanted to have a conversation, and Todd Welter actually came to me with this idea. Todd Welter from Locked On White Sox. I'm Jeff Carr from Locked On Reds. And looking at managerial searches and things of this nature, the White Sox and the Reds are in vastly different spots as far as where they fancy themselves contending in 2025. So Skip Schumaker, it kind of feels obvious that the Reds would be a more attractive option, but I feel like there are a couple of questions to answer with all of this. And I think the first one that stems for me, Todd, is what team really provides the most stability? The Cincinnati Reds just signed David Bell this past offseason to a 3-year extension and then decided to cut that 3 years, 2 years short by letting him go with 5 games left in the regular season in 2024. Now, he had managed here for the better part of 6 seasons, but it kind of felt like they sort of showed that, all right, maybe we are going to be a little bit more merit-based when it comes to our managerial choices here. Whereas the White Sox are headed for a rebuild, and maybe they can provide a little bit of a longer contract and be like, look, you're our dude for the rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is also that the White Sox have is they have an owner who's obviously been just absolutely bashed during this historic season, but losing season, but he is very loyal, almost loyal to a fault. And he's definitely going to be loyal to the general manager making the hire. And also he's definitely going to be loyal to Tony La Russa, who is the biggest connection that the White Sox will have to Skip Schumaker. So you do have that stability there where he'll be loyal. On the flip side, time is undefeated. And this is the sad existence that White Sox fans have. We actually have to root for someone to pass away. So Jerry Reinsdorf, he's 88 years old. Once he bites the bullet, they're going to sell the team. So there is that issue of, if you think about it, the 20,000 foot view, is it going to be that much stability? I don't know, because again, we don't know how much time is left on the owner's, time on earth here.
No, and that's true. And kind of when you're thinking about Skip, like just as a manager as a whole, he's very, very young, just his second year managing in 2024. What do you make of this? Because I know there's been a lot of folks, we've talked about this a lot, where his rookie season as a manager, he leads the Marlins to the playoffs. His second year, they're a 100-loss team. Where are you at on Skip when you look at him as a manager? Is it like he is just starting out and needs more seasoning before he can be that guy that names his price, or is he already there?
I think he's already there, just in terms of he has the Manager of the Year award on the wall. He has a playoff appearance, and you've shown what he can do when there is, as we talked about, there is stability. This year, the Marlins were such a dysfunctional mess in terms of already, trying to bring in a boss for Kim Ng, who just built a team that got to the playoffs, and the owner was like, "Hey, you need a boss," and she was like, "No, thank you." And then you get all these injuries that just wipe out their rotation. So then he's left with a mess. And then they obviously make more trades at the trade deadline to be, at 100 losses. So I think teams are going to look at it and say, okay, he's got the former player experience. He does now have the manager experience, and he does have playoff experience. I think teams will talk themselves into saying he's the guy that's going to put them over the top, because you've shown, in his rookie year, he kind of was a plus manager. This year, there is context into why he's a negative manager. When you're trying to hire a manager, at the very least, you want to have, I've been saying this at the floor, a net neutral manager in terms of like wins above replacement. You want a 0 wins above replacement manager and then a plus manager. So I think some teams will convince themselves that he's the guy because he can do that and give you a couple extra wins.
What do you think? Because I know, and you had a great episode about Chris Getz coming out and saying that they're not really going to spend that much on the roster this offseason. What do you think their likelihood is to spend bigger on a manager like Skip Schumaker? Because I think that that's probably the biggest question when you compare these two organizations, where I know that, the White Sox aren't in a position where they're going to spend a lot. The Reds should be in that position, but they have been very hesitant to spend any sort of money. And I think that when you look at a lot of the needs that the Reds have, if they're going to take from the budget that requires them to go out for free agency or trades to pay a manager, I don't think that's a good idea. So is there a likelihood that the White Sox could outbid the Reds in this?
No. So at least I'll give Reds fans who are obviously hopeful that they would get their top target. The White Sox have never really paid for a manager, and they just never win a bidding war. I mean, they lost out on Manny Machado because they refused to guarantee an extra $50 million. So they offered him the most money. That was their excuse. But it was half of, I think it was like 50 to 75 million was tied up in incentives, where the Padres were like, here's the money. So the Sox never win a bidding war, and they've just never paid for a manager. I mean, think about it. Jerry Reinsdorf, who also owns the Bulls, allowed Jerry Krause back in the 90s to think it's okay to let Phil Jackson walk because coaches and managers are replaceable. I mean, the Sox also had Jeff Torborg once. Back in the 90s. He won the AL Manager of the Year. 2 years later, they just let him walk to the Mets out of his contract because they didn't want to have to pay him. So I don't think they're going to outbid him, unless the key factor is what's the relationship that Tony La Russa has with Skip, and how much does the shadow GM, because Tony La Russa is kind of the shadow GM of the White Sox, how much does he really want Skip to be the manager? That could be the key deciding factor in getting the owner to open up his wallet. Going back to the Reds, I do think they should spend for that, because when you're a small market team, you got to win in the margins. And again, getting a good manager is one way to win in the margins. Look at how the Brewers have been dominating the NL Central. They had Craig Counsell, and then they did eventually he eventually left. But Pat Murphy, he's been a plus manager. That's what I keep saying. You want to find those wins above replacement managers.
No, that's a fair point. And you kind of mentioned the shadow GM. Like, there's still definitely an influence of Walt Jocketty on the Reds organization, so there'll be that Cardinals connection as well. If it's Midwest baseball, man, Skip seems tied into it, so it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that goes. What do you make of this? Because I find it interesting. A guy like Skip, who starts off his career going to the playoffs and things like this, obviously he's going to have a taste to get back to the playoffs. But what do you think the likelihood is that he's going to be a guy that's like, you know what, maybe I want that smoke. Maybe I want to rebuild Southside baseball here and be the guy that really leads that next era. I obviously know that the era is not going to start this year, but it's something he could put his stamp on and build it from the ground up, because I think that's the other reservation that I have here by just saying, well, yes, the Reds are on top of the White Sox in this case.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring up, because the actual GM of the White Sox, Chris Getz, did say he's looking for a partner. So in this case, he would be going to a situation where it's going to probably be a partnership. The one thing, though, that I would like to see the White Sox do, and I've talked about on this past shows, is they've got a really good thing going now with Brian Bannister. They've made him basically in charge of the entire pitching of the White Sox, from top to bottom. And that's really good when it comes to developing players. I'd like to see them do that with the hitting and the fielding. But in that case, then what does that do to the manager? That makes them be more of an in-game manager. So would he feel like, well, I want to have that partnership, and I want to be in charge of, help be in charge of the whole organization. Whereas if you bring in this guru of hitting, which has been rumored to be done, or that they're going to want to do, where does that minimize him? But at the same time, like I said, the intrigue of being a guy who could have a partnership with Chris Getz, that could be appealing to him. Because now that I think about it, he probably walked into the Marlins thinking, this might be a rebuild situation. I mean, the Marlins surprised everybody, last year by going to the playoffs, by getting ahead. So, yeah, you're right. He might be able to say, you know what, I'm going to leave. But the thing is, to counter back, is how stable is the Reds compared to the White Sox? The White Sox are a huge dysfunctional mess. It's been well documented, well written, and he's escaping a dysfunctional mess right now with the Marlins. So I would say if the Reds are stable, they've got a leg up on the White Sox.
There's definitely, and depending on who you ask in Reds country, there's definitely a feeling of dysfunctionalness among this organization, because they have not moved in the postseason in 30 years. But on the roster, there's not a lot of dysfunction. There's definitely question marks. There's not a lot of, concrete answers outside of Ellie De La Cruz and Hunter Green, but those are the two guys that you're looking at when you're talking about what's the attractive features of the Reds for a guy like Skip Schumaker, or if you could lure a Terry Francona out of retirement, or bring Buck Showalter out of the media space and back into the manager's chair. Like, what are you talking about with guys like that? And it's those superstar players. And at least for Hunter Green, you'll have him for another 5 years. For Ellie, 4 years. Depends on what sort of negotiations you get with Scott Boras as to how that, if that could be longer or not. But you definitely have that 3-year window. You always hear about 3-year windows given to managers from contending teams. You definitely have a solid 3 years to work with as far as the front office, hopefully investing in the roster and helping you out there as well.
Well, and the name that you just brought up, then we should even just hit stop here. I think Terry Francona then is the more logical choice for the Reds, because again, they want to try to compete now. What they haven't been doing, just from an outside perspective, is they've been kind of again doing what the White Sox did in 2020 and 2021, shopping at the bargain bin to put themselves over the top, like with Frankie Montas, all that. You should stop shopping at the bargain section and get into it, even just the premium section, or even just the guys section. for the White Sox fans, and Andrew Benintendi, even though that was $75 million, that's the cost of doing things. Like I go back, right. Lorenzo Cain, give that type of deal to a type of veteran that will bring you over the top, and then try to find that trade partner to get your version of Christian Yelich that would put you over the top. Because you're right, the Reds are working with actual foundational pieces. I go back to 2018 with the Brewers when they made all those moves with Yelich and Cain. They didn't really have a true foundational piece. They had to trade for their Christian Yelich. So my suggestion is this is just my suggestion, and I know when I make suggestions to the Reds, the fan base doesn't like it when I've done that. Last summer that happened to me. But yeah, I actually think Terry Francona would be your best bet. Skip Schumaker, and then find your equivalent to a Christian Yelich type trade and your impact veteran free agent to get yourself over the top. All right, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. I'll be back on Monday to discuss the season mercifully finally coming to an end. Feel free to leave comments about today's topics regarding the Sox being booed for winning another report for the team's dysfunction, and my crossover talk with Locked On Reds host Jeff Carr about both teams' pursuit of Skip Schumaker to be their next manager. You can leave those comments at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dubber, at Locked On Sox, or email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Have a good weekend. See you Monday.